What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason and Joe here. Coming at you with a classic album review today. This one chosen by our patrons through our monthly poll. Today we are reviewing an album that I believe, both like a lot. Odessey and Oracle by the Zombies. It made both of our top fives in 1968. And I went back and looked, and I was shocked to find that it was not in Cram's top five, which is funny because he is probably the person most responsible for me taking note of how great of a singer Colin Blunstone was. I remember in one of the first times I met Cram, he was sharing his list of favorite singers, and Colin Blunstone was on like his top 10. And that's when I really took note of how good of a singer he was. And then for him to snub Odessey and Oracle in 68 was shocking.
That's why we kicked his ass off the channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Incongruities like that.
But we haven't had a chance to really talk about this album in a long time. Yeah, that video, that 68 video was back in 2020, I believe. So, been quite a few years. And if you've joined the channel anytime after that, you may have no idea what we think of this record. So, we'll talk about it in a little more depth today.
The Zombies were an interesting case in the 60s. They just blew up with She's Not There, which absolutely rules. It's one of the best songs of all time in 1964. And they had one other, maybe two other kind of like big hits. Tell Her No was moderately large, and I think they had one other maybe. And then they kind of just like disappeared. Like they had a couple like really low charting singles, like 80s, 90s. And then for whatever reason, I have no idea why this band didn't catch on. And they put out Carousel 44 in 67. And this is their, you know, a single. I don't know if it was supposed to be on the album or not, but they came out with Carousel 44 and one other uh Beechwood Park, I think, was a single, which is a bad choice, but they totally just didn't even chart at all, like totally sunk like a stone. And the band played one final show in the end of 67 and broke up. And they were broke up before this album even came out, which is wild. What did you say, it was self-financed?
Yeah, they were dropped by Decca, and I read that it was self-financed, but I also read that they were signed to CBS before going into the studio. So I'm not entirely clear on who paid for the recording.
Well, I know they didn't have any money. They had very little money, so they had to practice like the Dickens and go in really tight, not a lot of overdubs, nothing like that. And, basically when it came out, it just nothing. Like it was totally ignored, didn't do anything. And it wasn't until 69 when Al Cooper was like, hey, you got to check out this band. And he really pushed it. And then Time of the Season became a huge hit for a band that no longer existed. And I mean, it was so far after the album came out, like Rod Argent and Chris White had already formed Argent and were already starting like playing and practicing with Argent. It was this, top 10 hit with a band. It's literally a zombie band that no longer exists. Very appropriate. And then since then, I mean, nothing else really came out from that album after Time of the Season. So it's not like there was, a ton of hits around it or anything. The album didn't go to number one. But in the years following, it's really gained a cult following. Critics sort of who had ignored it or just didn't even know it existed came back around and really liked it. It's got even Robert Christgau gave it an A minus, 5 stars from All Music, Pitchfork 9.3. And this was back in 2004 when they were still really mean. 150 all time on Rate Your Music, 243rd all time on Rolling Stone, even though it used to be number 100. It's dropped a little bit, but still, I mean, this is regarded now as one of the great albums of all time. And it's really one of the few on like any of these all-time lists that just had like zero impact when it came out. Like it was just totally ignored. And just over the years, more and more people listening to it, hearing it, it has just gained, you know, cultural standing and cult following and everything else. And now is super acclaimed, which I think is really cool for an album, released by a band that no longer existed when it, made it big.
Worth noting that Butcher's Tale was a single. Wikipedia lists it as the fourth single, but I think it actually came out before the Time of the Season single. And I think what is the most obvious hit on the whole record, This Will Be Our Year, was the B-side of that very bizarre choice of single.
Just,
Uh,
yeah, producer malpractice or, label malpractice for this one.
they thought Butcher's Tale would resonate with the anti-war sentiment or something. Yeah, I don't know. Um, but if you know that song, it's just like organ heavy, very like baroque and like dark and not poppy and not very melodic at all. So yeah, interesting.
So to say the title of it, Odyssey, it's misspelled, and that was an accident, and they tried to claim it was on purpose, but no, it's not how you spell Odyssey, but they just went with it. It didn't matter. Didn't matter.
And yeah, that always messes me up when I'm searching for it, or and has affected my regular life trying to spell the word Odyssey normally. So it's got me all messed up. Songwriting on this record, I think it's unreal. It's so good. Every song is incredible. If you aren't super familiar with the Zombies, they had two primary songwriters, the keyboard player Rod Argent and the bass player Chris White. And on this record, Argent has five of the credits, while White has seven of them. It's pretty much top to bottom bangers. Even Butcher's Tale, which I, proclaimed as a bad single, is I think a good, like great album cut. So
Well, it was my winner of 1968 album of the year for a reason. I just think it's just one of the best written song or best written albums of all time. I think everything is perfect. A song like Carousel 44, which, I don't know how Rod Argent did it because never again did he ever write anything even close to as clever as something like Carousel 44. So maybe just outside the Zombies, whatever, tried for a different sound, a different style, but something like Carousel 44 where you don't know like the twists in the beginning and it sort of starts off as this like, pleasant love song until, a minute in you find out that like she's in jail and he's like writing to her and it's just like this odd twist on a very standard formula that I think is just always like I don't know what it is. It just as soon as I heard it, I was like, this isn't like normal. This is something beyond what you would get in the 60s. And between Rod Argent and Chris White, they just write 12 perfect songs. It's the lyrics are, heartrending or kind of clever like Carousel 44. Rose for Emily's just really gorgeous. There's a lot of sort of autumnal feeling for me on this one. It's sad, but it's not like mopey, but there's like also tunes like Friends of Mine, which are really just like pleasant and upbeat and just about friendship. Like who's writing about friendship? Nobody like this.
my only nitpick song wise is that, and I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I think Time of the Season feels a little stylistically disconnected from the rest of the record. It seems to like come out of nowhere. It feels, I don't know, it doesn't, I don't think it fits in with the rest of the record. And the fact that it's last and was the hit, it's just a weird way to end the record. It's a great song. It's a perfect song. I love it, but it does feel weird last on this record.
Time of the Season feels like it should have come out on their first album.
Yeah.
Like the more jazzy stuff that they were doing in 64. And it doesn't really fit. I don't think Butcher's Tale really fits either. Like those two towards the end, the two singles, whatever. I think they're very good songs, but they definitely have like a different feel to them than the rest of the tunes on here, which are mostly just like really short, like perfectly harmony pop songs with lots of space and just gorgeous little melodies.
Yeah. The musicianship, I think it's killer. So underrated. Rod Argent, I think, is one of the great keyboardists in the history of rock, period. Hugh Grundy is a name that I've never heard mentioned once in any conversation of great drummers, but his playing on this I think is so good. It's like the perfect middle ground between Ringo and Keith Moon. I think he's just right on the money. It's great playing. Chris White's bass work is great. I love his part on Brief Candles in the chorus. Such a cool bass line. The bass line on Maybe After He's Gone is fantastic. He's really tasteful and but like still manages to bring some interesting elements to the songs. Like he's not just like being boring. And sometimes you say tasteful, it means they're not doing anything interesting. I think he's doing some interesting stuff, but not overdoing it. And then Blundstone's voice is just one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, the harmonies, I don't know, outside of maybe the Beach Boys and the Byrds, maybe even better than the Byrds, just some of the greatest harmonies ever. Blundstone's leads are incredible. I like Rod Argent's. I like how different it is than Blundstone's. They just work in tandem really well. I think this might be my favorite. Maybe, well, it's hard to tell, but I don't think there's many albums in history with better keys than this one. Between like the Hammond organ and the mellotron and the harpsichord jangle on something like Cell 44. I just love the way the mellotron sounds. It's one of my favorite instruments, and it just adds this like lushness to everything. Chris White's bass playing is phenomenal. I love that counterpoint on Carousel 44. It's up front a lot. It has a great tone to it. Drums are great. Guitar, you don't really notice too much, but it's there. And I just love the way there's so much like space in this. Like there's parts where it's just a piano, or it's a part where it's just a cappella singing, or it's just guitar. Like everybody has a perfect part to play in these songs. And this goes back to songwriting, but it's not like overly done where things are like clashing against each other. It's very like minimal at times, and yet it's like just so gorgeously beautiful at all points. Like it's just one of the prettiest albums I think ever made.
Production, I think it's pretty stellar. 9 of the 12 tracks recorded at EMI, which is now Abbey Road, and it was recorded on the same Studer 4 track that Sergeant Pepper's was, and yeah, it's great. They delivered a mono mix to the label, then the label informed them that they also needed a stereo mix, so then they had to go out of pocket for that too, and there were some issues with that where they had to like um, reprocess mono for stereo because they had recorded or yeah, I think it was trumpet on This Will Be Our Year just directly onto the mono mix. So yeah, I mean, there's some things where maybe it isn't quite up to the same standard as some other records from the same time period, but it still sounds great.
Yeah, when I think of like 60s production, I think of this more than any other album. I know it's not like the example of 60s production, but there's just like a feel and like a tone and a hum to it. And maybe it's the combination of, the musicianship and the songwriting and just the way it all fits together, but just the gorgeousness and the baroqueness of it. It just has like this perfectly like 60s tone to me. And maybe it's because Time of the Season was played in every single movie about the 60s ever made. But like I just feel like this is the 60s when I'm listening to it, which is perfect.
We could do best and worst song, but I don't know. They're all so good. You got a best? If you had to,
Uh, Christ. I mean, I guess my three favorite. I can't even really pick three. Carousel 44, Brief Candles, and Hung Up on a Dream, maybe my three favorites, but I could also easily say This Will Be Our Year, or Rose for Emily, or Time of the Season, or whatever. The worst song, and there's no worst song. I just always thought Butcher's Tale felt a little out of place, just because it's like so cold and, you know, I don't know, icy, and thematically it's kind of like harsh and cruel, and it just has a different feel than the rest of the album to me. Very winter, where everything else is very fall.
yeah, it's really hard to say best. Care of Self 44, maybe After He's Gone, Brief Candles, maybe if I was doing three. Yeah, it's tough. They're all really good. And worst, yeah, I'd probably say probably Butcher's Tale, I guess. Yeah, probably. Score, it's a five, like a high five for me. And it is probably in my top 20 albums of all time. And if not, definitely top 50 for sure. But probably top 20. It's way up there among my favorites of all time. And, it's one of those records like it's impossible to win album of the year in the 60s because of the Beatles for me. But if it wasn't for the Beatles, this would be my album of the year in 68, I think.
Yeah, and this is one of my 14 or 15, 10 out of 10, just perfect score album. So yeah, I don't really think it could get much better than this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let us know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Check the video description for our Patreon, and you can vote on what the next classic album will be. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.